UK Motor Talk.
Hi everyone, we're here, we are back. I'm Mike.
I'm Jim, hello.
I'm Graham, hello.
And this is UK Motor Talk, host Goodwood. I'm still recovering a bit from this. One of the guys we spoke to, one of the engineers that was working on the drift cars, reckoned he walked 54 miles in 2 days. And I can genuinely believe that because there is a lot of ground to cover at Goodwood, isn't there?
Indeed there is. The site is now frighteningly big, from the point at which you get out of your car in the car park and then have to walk a mile to get to the media centre. And the media centre is not at the heart, as one might think, of the event. It's right on the periphery, and if you want to go see the supercars, for example, it's miles and miles and miles to walk.
I'm sure your heart bleeds for us, doesn't it?
It's certainly good for the step count, although we were sort of slightly disappointed, weren't we, Mike, when we had a look at our step count late on in the day, and we're both feeling quite knackered, and we were at 13,000 steps, and you thought, hang on, you're supposed to do 10,000 a day. We got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and all we have done all day literally is walk, and we're only at 13,000 steps. I mean, although I think we decided there was a lot of standing and just time on your feet without actually doing too many steps for a lot of it, wasn't there? But it's I think it doesn't really matter how much time you spend there over the weekend, does it? You could be there from the minute the gates open till the minute the gates close on all 4 days, and you'd struggle to see it all.
Yeah.
I think there'd be something that you'd miss from the weekend. I always come away from the weekend and watch the roundups and the highlight videos and things like that and think, oh, I missed that, didn't see that, missed that, didn't see that, completely missed that bit. But it just whets the appetite for next year.
And then you realise that the only way they've gotten where you didn't is because they've got 6 or 7 or 8 crews doing it with the appropriate number of presenters, and we're trying to cover all of the bases with rather fewer people.
Maybe they just have e-scooters so they can nip about. Or maybe they all have Citroen Amis, I'm not sure.
Well, maybe they have golf carties galore.
Yeah, I think you could probably legally drive a Citroen Ami everywhere else that you could drive a golf buggy, couldn't you, and get away with it?
I think you probably could. It turns out I've completely missed Koenigsegg. Where were they?
No, didn't see them at all. I think there was a couple of sections that we'd maybe accidentally slightly shortcutted. So we must try and do more walking next year. That's our resolution. If we could try and do 100 miles over the 4 days.
I never usually get time to read the programme and the magazine and so on until sometimes later on the Sunday night or even the following day. I was always disappointed in myself that I haven't got to more places, but it just isn't possible. Even in 4 days, you just can't cover it. How the Duke does it, God knows. Up until relatively recently, he and his sidekick, his personal assistant, who's carrying a diary which gets larger and larger and larger, they used to go across the site on a dirt bike.
I was about to say, I think a dirt bike or maybe a jetpack. I think that's the way to do the festival next year. If you had a jetpack and just buzzed around everywhere, that would be the way to do it.
You just want to do that so you can say, I have to fly, and then just take off.
Yes,
yeah.
I think we need to start a Patreon and kick the Patreon up several notches so we can afford to buy 3 or 4 jetpacks for next year. What do we reckon?
I think it's a great idea. In fact, if you want to provide us with jetpacks, you can always find us anywhere at UK Motor Talk across all media. Or indeed, if you happen to run and own a European news channel and you would like to fund us to fly around, indeed, then we are UK Motor Talk on jetpacks. Hashtag UK Motor Talk on jetpacks. You'll be able to find us. If you know anyone, then let us know when you grab.
I think we should do some colours as well. We should look like a sort of budget version of the Red Arrows.
Very budget. A slightly dad bod version of the Red Arrows. As we flop around Goodwood, so to speak. Interesting choice of words. It's great though, isn't it? We're almost always at Goodwood for something or another, and there's always something new to see. And it's interesting. I think there's perhaps a few less of the bigger manufacturers. I was quite surprised to see that BMW were there, but not many. BMW celebrating 50 years of M this year, so obviously a big thing to celebrate. And there's some very interesting stuff there. I was more interested in the E30 they had and the E46 M3 CSL, which was gorgeous, although it did have the SMG box. Yes, I'm not sure. I'd probably want a manual one of those instead. Although you had a sit and play in the M3 Touring, didn't you, Jim?
Yeah, a little bit OTT on the inside. I thought just in a few things, in the way they've done a few things. It was, I mean, I adored my old 3 Series. I thought there was a very comfortable, very well equipped, very sporty, just pretty much the perfect car, really. I mean, if they'd have done a touring version of that, I'd have probably bought it and still have it today. I think I just needed that bit more room in it, as it was coming towards the end of its 3 years. But it was, yeah, just a few OTT bits, and the steering wheel's got even bigger and even chunkier, and just the seats have got even more extreme and even more bolstery and whatever else, and maybe just I'm not quite sure, but it was a hell of a thing. I think I'd if a few numbers came up on the lottery, I'd definitely put it on the short list of cars to test drive for a couple of 3-4 days and work out which one I wanted to spend 100 and something £1,000 on to cart the family around in.
The surprising thing for me, really, with the current range of Hot 5 series, the M5 and the like, is that they have sticky-on wheel arch extensions. Okay, a number of manufacturers have done this. I'm thinking sort of 80s Fords and bits and pieces. In fact, even the 90s ones, I remember they did Mondeos with just the fronts. Weird. But they put them on just the back, and it looks pants. You're spending that sort of money on a car. It's a lot of money. And this was the same for the electric ones and the let's say the 5 Series. But they've got a wider rear wheels on. They've just stuck these plastic bits on the edge. And I don't really get what BMW are doing at the moment. And the more they do what they're currently doing, the more I think I'd probably buy an RS4, RS6, or probably a Taycan or something else that isn't that. 'Cause I really like the previous M5.
Between us, you've always been more Audi and I've been more BMW, and in fact, at the time I was running around in my BMW, you were running around in your Audi, and they both suited us for very different reasons, but we both preferred our own cars, but could see the good in the others' cars. But I look at the 3 Series Touring now, and I think, well, you just asked me, didn't you? I said, well, if you could have that or an RS6, I'd just, in a heartbeat, I said, I'd have the RS6. No question. Having not driven the pair of them back to back and sat and looked at the spec and the colours and the options, I just instantly went for the Audi, or, as you say, I think a Taycan Cross Turismo Grand Sport Estate Bred Van Wagon Shooting, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it.
I think it would probably be one of them, but if it was something internal combustion powered, then it would be the Audi, and it was odd, but that's the way BMWs are going. I mean, BMW design has always grown on me and taken a while to grow on me, but this has taken a bit longer, and it's still not growing on me quite yet. So I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a bit old. I think it happens as you get older.
I did like my Audi. I think there's something about hot Audis. There's something about the Taycan that I like very much indeed. Electric stuff is becoming more and more appealing to me. I'd like at this point, at the other end of the scale, just to mention the sheer serenity of sitting in the Polestar 2. We sat in the car and just opened and shut the doors several times in the middle of Goodwood, just because the noise difference was crazy, wasn't it? You'd open the doors, it'd be really loud, shut the doors, and it was just, where's everything gone? It was really quiet inside there.
It was like it had active noise cancellation or something pumping in the opposite of the noise, so it cancelled it out, but the car wasn't on, so it definitely, even if it does have that, it wasn't doing it, and it was whisper quiet inside. It was lovely.
We've driven cars with that. Posh Cougar, in fact, I drove with an active noise cancellation-y thingy that makes it all quiet inside. I'd forgotten about all that kind of tech, largely due to the fact that most of the time I don't really care. It was pretty quick. It had some quite nice little touches in that, didn't it, as well? The things that didn't need to be there, but were there just because they were nice. Like there's a little projective bit that drops out underneath the sunroof and just shines the logo into the roof. No real need for that. It's just a nice feature. I thought, that's nice.
Yeah, it must cost a 50p or a pound or a quid or £2, whatever it is, to integrate it and get it up and running. But as you say, it's just that nice little, oh, that's nice. And actually, I think every car needs a few of those, well, that's nice features, rather than, oh yeah, they saved a few quid there, but oh yeah, well, it helps keep the price down, doesn't it? So it's all right. It's no, I think as cars get more and more expensive, I appreciate the need for trimming out cost where you can and increasing profit, particularly as most manufacturers aren't building many cars at the moment. They certainly need to make more money at the ones they are selling. But I think to pinch everything, I've never got in a car and thought, oh, that's a really good way of saving £1. I'm glad.
Yeah. I think you appreciate the gadget a lot more. And the thing is with these gadgets that that things like adding multicoloured LED lights and things in there, or adding LEDs in the footwells and the door bins, how much does that really cost? Probably not a lot, but it just makes it a generally a much nicer place to be.
Yeah.
And when other manufacturers are, they don't need that bit of chrome or bit of stainless steel on there, we can make that out of plastic instead. That will save 50p. And I'm saying, why are you cheaping out? Cars are more expensive, so even if it's a case of we need to have things in cars that we perceive as being expensive or premium, or what the manufacturers like to call surprise and delight, which is just sickening, isn't it? Features inside a car. It makes sense to have these little bits because you get that is quite nice. Things like the mirrors, which don't have the mirrors move rather than the glass inside moving. The whole unit moves, which must be ridiculously expensive if it gets hit, but does look quite cool.
We had a conversation about utility bills and cost of living during the week, didn't we? And what actually really gets you about the electricity, gas and petrol and diesel prices going up is it's literally the same as it was a year ago. A litre of petrol today gives you, well, ignore the E5, E10 conversation about economy, but if you can ignore that, a litre of petrol today is exactly the same as a litre of petrol was last year, yet the price is near enough double. Why?
Yeah,
your electricity is, it's not like my lights have suddenly got brighter. My electricity's gone up 100 and a bit pounds a month. I'm not getting better electricity. My dinner doesn't cook quicker. It's exactly the same. So why is it more expensive? I think car manufacturers are in danger of, as you say, cheapening out, but it's more expensive. So you think, well, hang on, I'm now expected to pay more and get less. That really doesn't work. And okay, I think as people move between brands, then it's maybe okay, because what is one level of trim or fit or finish in one manufacturer's car is different to another. So if you're new to the brand, it's okay. But if you're sat there in a 4-year-old Fiesta, Focus, 3 Series, Mini, whatever it is, looking at a brand new one, if you think, well, if I buy the same trim level for more money than I paid for the last one, there's a lot of things in this car that are worse. So why would I buy it? I'll stick with the old one. Thank you very much.
And facelifts at this point look a bit cynical, don't they, I think?
It's a bit like the football team changing its team strip twice a year because it's merchandising. And some of the facelifts are just that, I think. They're not about refreshing the brand. They're not about refreshing the model. They're just merchandising.
The sobering thought and discovery was that having remortgaged or about to remortgage, looking at the energy bills and food bills and everything else, roughly, and this is the same for lots of families and probably everyone listening really, I'm about £400 a month worse off for exactly the same thing than I was in February, which seems absolutely mad. It does seem mad. And this prompted me to look at something else, car related. Now, we wandered through Electric Avenue and there were lots of interesting cars there, including the Ego, which if you want to hear us talk about that, I would strongly suggest listening to our Goodwood podcast, which you can listen back to, where we talk in a lot more detail about all the things we've just spoken about and many other things besides. But the Citroen Ami, now we've talked about this on the podcast several times before. We haven't really talked about the pricing in terms of the lease of this. The long story short of this is if you put £2 and a bit grand in, it's about £20 a month, which is pretty bargainous. But I think better than that, if you put £1,000 in, it's about £40 a month. If you put nothing in, it's about £50 a month. So if you can do 45 miles to £1 in one of these things, as it stands at the moment, if you listen to this in 4 months' time and electricity is 5 or 6 times as much, sorry, you probably want to go and do the maths yourself. But nevertheless, if I can do 45 miles to £1, it's actually cheaper for me to have an Ami and run it than it would be to spend the petrol to get to work. Now, this does present some problems, chief of which is that the Ami will only do 26 or 28 miles an hour, depending where you're reading. It doesn't seem to have ISOFIX, which is a bit weird, because pretty much every car does. And the roads to work are in order: 30, 40, 50, 70, 30. So there's a bit of an issue with being able to travel on these roads. And I'm trying to work out if I can go a different way to work, which would take me a bit longer, but would mean that I could effectively get to work cheaper than fuel. So in a weird kind of man maths, it would actually cost me more not to own an Ami, which is a bizarre way of looking at things. And walking isn't possible. Cycling might be, but then you end up very red and sweaty and everything else. And if it rains, it's a problem, whereas an Ami has a roof. Now, I've booked myself a test drive or whatever it is that we're going to do. I'm waiting for Citroen to tell me when I can try one. And the person I spoke to, Citroen, said, you must try one on your route and see if it works for you. So if I can do that, I will record all of that and you'll be able to see me driving at 28 miles an hour past all the trucks and bits and pieces and holding on for grim death. I like the car. I think it's really fascinating. It's really interesting. And what really surprised me is how much space there is inside, because there's no cargo space or no rear seats. You sit so far back. It's a bit like the first time I got into a new Mini, where the windscreen's upright but quite away from you. This is this times. It's like you're sitting in the back seat of something. So much so, in fact, that from the passenger seat, you can't touch the bulkhead with your feet.
Yeah, I stretched my feet out completely and couldn't get anywhere near it. So actually, on a long journey, you can't really do a long journey. You know, you're limited by the range of the battery. But actually, to spend any amount of time in it at all, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you?
You would, but because bearing in mind my commute to work is 5 miles, and theoretically, this is the perfect car to be able to do that, because I could go to and fro many, many times for most of the week, probably, without having to plug it into my 3-pin charger or use the adapter to plug it into a Type 2, which would presumably charge it up in 3.5 minutes. And I figured if I made my gate a bit wider at the back of the garden, I could probably drive it into the garden rather than having to worry about parking it out the front, which is fine. One guy who was very insecure in himself said that he couldn't possibly drive one because he would just die of embarrassment and all his friends taking the mick out of him. Probably need some better friends, or otherwise need to be a bit more secure in yourself, really.
Yeah, very insecure about something, and the embarrassment. There's obviously something that's happened to him in some point up into his life, up until now, to make him feel like that. But I didn't quite get it, because ultimately it's cool, it's funky, it's different. Why not?
Maybe his dinky toy collection was smaller than anybody else's, and that scarred him for life.
I don't think I've ever bought one car because I wanted someone else to care about what I drove. I tend to buy the cars that I buy because I either need it for a purpose, i.e. the Volvo, or because I want that particular car, or because I have to have that particular car, or it was the one that best suited my needs. I don't buy it because I care what anyone else thinks. I'm sorry if that offends any of you listening, incidentally.
Or because it's the one the wife wanted, maybe.
Or because it's the one the wife wanted. That's not my car. I will keep saying this. But there is something. Yes, I just pay for it. That did occur to me, and that's because it's a quadricycle, the Ami, this is, and not a car. It doesn't have to pass the same crash testing that cars do, and as a result,
I think it has. I think it has to pass all to the same crash test that pedestrians do, don't they? In that, yes, just don't, and that's it. The crash test is, don't crash. No, silly idea. Awful business, crashing. Don't do that.
Considering there's a big gap in front of your feet, that's probably a good thing. I think that's your crumple zone, because there's no airbags and there's no side impact protection to the extent where you can sort of push on the inside of the door almost and make it pop out on the other side.
You're not selling it to me, Michael.
I am genuinely interested in this, but what do you guys
interesting
think?
Project.
Yeah, I mean it's a plastic body over a metal frame. So if you think gazebo, you're kind of Meeks Little Tykes car. You're kind of there. I'm not knocking it because I think this is brilliant. This has real potential from its 8 horsepower electric motor. I'd like to see what, if they weren't limited, they could do, because I think if it could do 40 or 50, that suddenly makes it a completely different proposition. If slightly terrifying.
I'm sure somebody will crack it or chip it or hack it or whatever they do to trick it into going that bit quicker. Whether it's just fitting bigger wheels for a bigger top speed, you can do that with e-bikes, mountain bikes. They come with a certain size wheel on them, so you fit a bigger wheel and you go bigger, or you move the sensor and it tricks it into thinking it's doing a different speed, and you can go that bit quicker with it.
But it is a car that's a part of a long existing part of French car culture. Very, very small cars, very, very small engines, very limited speeds, sometimes very limited safety, but the French have always bought those in quite large numbers. Never see them anywhere else other than France, mind.
There's a good reason for this. That's because I can't remember if it's 14 or 16, one of the two, that you can drive those in France, and you don't have to have a license. If you lost your license, you could still drive one.
Yeah, well, exactly. The drink driving regulations where you would lose your license, but you can still drive one of those microcars.
Yeah, so if you think you've got the option of taking a scooter, which will do whatever it might do, 30-ish miles an hour, or you can take this instead, and it's dry. There is a heater, which is very loud. There's no blower, no fan. There's no stereo, effectively. You stick your phone in the top of the dashboard and that's it. But you can buy a Bluetooth speaker for it, I found, which is, I know, which goes in the cup holder. And if you pay an extra £400, you get some little trinket trays that go on the top of the dash and hubcaps and some stickers. But the trinket trays are designed, and this is genuinely true, so it'll hold a cup of coffee and a croissant. And I think I think that's genuinely interesting. I really do want to drive one, and I want to see what it's like. But what do you guys think about only being able to do about 30 miles an hour and the safety of that, i.e. getting in people's way, and B, how would you feel in that against something like a lorry, with lorries and such coming past you?
Well, given the typical speeds on the M25 now, that at its top speed would be roughly equivalent to the average top speed on the M25. But in terms of that small car against a 40-ton truck, I wouldn't rate your chances highly.
It's maybe unfair to compare it to a normal car in the traditional sense. You compare it to anything brand new and that's 5-star Euro NCAP'd up, or even your old Volvo, or just, any car made since about 1982, I would suggest. It's not as safe, but it's safer than walking. It's safer than being on a bike, on a scooter, on a moped, and it is more akin to the scooter, moped, quad bike end of transport than it is a Mercedes E-Class, isn't it? It's far, far, far closer to a quad bike than a Volvo estate in terms of size and fit and finish and feel and ethos. So it's probably slightly unfair to slate it for that reason. I've for a while held the belief that I think a sensible road safety rule would be ignoring 30 and 40 mile an hour limits, because and 20s as well, because they're generally in built up, slower moving, busier areas anyway. I never think it's a good idea to drive a vehicle on a road where you cannot do the speed limit. For example, you wouldn't want to ride your push bike on the M25. You wouldn't want to drive a tractor on a motorway. When I'm out and about on the mountain bike, I avoid dual carriageways or 60 mile an hour roads wherever possible. If I need to cross one and do a very short journey on it, then okay. But I'll try and restrict that to, I'll cross over here, join it there, and get off and go up the other side as soon as I can, because it's just not safe, and you get in the way in the closing speed of a car behind you doing 60 or 70, and you're bimbling along at 10, 20, 30 miles an hour, whatever you're doing. It's not safe. But I think for the commute, I'd be all right with it. What it would maybe teach you is awareness. I often found at college anyone who'd driven a moped or a scooter at 16 for a year before they learnt to drive were a much more aware driver. They were much more observant and careful of things around them, because for a year they'd been riding around, and if something bumped into them, regardless of whose fault it was, they would come off worse and it would hurt. So that teaches you a lot about paying attention. So I think it would certainly hone your instinct from that point of view. I think if a 16 or 17-year-old drove one as their first car, they'd probably drive it and approach it slightly differently to the way we would, I think, with our knowledge and experience. I think we'd try and treat it too much like a car, which it isn't really, and less like a quad, which, let's face it, it is.
Yeah, it's true. I spent a lot of time driving Twizzys going back, and I'm sure I've probably mentioned this before, but I did quite enjoy driving those things. I used to drift as well, but they'll do 56 miles an hour, and were absolutely a sort of a replacement for a scooter, because if you had the option of doors, and they were an option you had to pay for, and they were rubbish. You didn't have windows. They were sort of plastic jobbies that went down the side, which meant you couldn't see out of them when it rained. which is when you'd want the windows in, and you had to open the window flap to put your hand inside to open the door, if memory serves. They were a bit pants, but I could understand that makes sense.
I remember when the smart cars first appeared, and I fell for them straight away. I thought they were brilliant little cars because they were. You still had quite a lot of performance, sporty performance, away from the lights and so on. You could really enjoy the car, but at the same time, you had an amazingly practical and cheap to run car. I was still very much in favour of those in the early days, and still am.
Well, they're not very small now, are they? Though.
Well, no,
they're just ugly.
They've got a bit like Golfs. They've just overinflated them. But to echo Jim's point about scooters, having had a couple of spills when I was on scooters a very long time ago, yes, it did make you a little more aware, not only of what you were doing, but what other people around you were doing.
That's probably no bad thing, and I think we were chatting on the in our WhatsApp group, and we'd alluded to briefly in our Formula One roundup the subject of safety in Formula One and cars in general. You know, what's been the biggest single thing or the biggest leap forward in road safety over the last few years? And it's like, well, actually, the best thing anybody can do is pay attention. Because if everybody was paying attention all the time, there would be far fewer accidents. If anything, there might actually be no accidents if everybody was looking at everything all the time and driving correctly. But it was the drink driving video that I'd stumbled across. YouTube recommended to me for some reason. It was a roving reporter down the pub a couple of days before the drink driving laws came in, and it was, oh, you've had 8 pints, so you are driving. Well, I'm fine to drive, and nobody can tell me I'm not fine to drive. Well, yes, but the science and the law says you won't be allowed to drive. Well, I don't believe in that. It's all nonsense. I'm telling you I'm all right to drive, and I'm the best judge of it. But it was just odd looking at the attitudes around drink driving, and then people would have 3 or 4 pints, but then the news reporters was, will you be all right? Will you live on 3 or 4 pints a night? I'm not sure that's medically possible. It was different attitudes, wasn't it? But I think drink driving laws have certainly helped. Yeah,
possibly you wouldn't live long with that amount of alcohol in your bloodstream. I caught a little bit of something earlier today, just flipping channels, and a guy obviously drink driving. He'd only had 4 drinks or so, he said, which presumably explained why his BMW was parked halfway through somebody's garden wall at a very curious angle.
Were they mega pints?
Well, I was going to say, is this a Freddie Flint off Johnny Depp level of... Because when he was out drinking all the time and found that beer was a bit too heavy, so he had to swap to wine for, fitness and health reasons. But he didn't want to look like a pansy, so he just had a pint of wine, but then suddenly realised it was 3-4 times the strength and he'd get absolutely bladdered on it. But it was the healthy option. Fewer calories.
Fewer calories, yes, keep death off the roads.
In terms of Formula One safety and how that filters in and out of road cars, you've seen even if you're not a fan of Formula One and bringing Gates in at this stage as not a fan of Formula One, he's still seen plenty of the replays that have been buzzing around from official footage and some fan footage as well is bouncing around YouTube of Guan Yu Zhou's accident at the weekend. I mean, that was just it was one of those very nasty, very sort of heart-stopping accidents, not quite as well, nowhere near as fiery, but not quite as dramatic as Grosjean's accident. And all the time the car's skidding along on its lid, you kind of think, well, that's dramatic, but it's actually okay. It's fine until he hits something. It's the way that he came to the stop that he did. It kind of reminded me in a little bit of a way of Sophia Flörsch's accident at Macau a few years back, where and I think I showed you this the other day as well, actually, Gates. Says, keep your eye on that little bit there. And then all of a sudden, bang, a car appears and lands in the catch fencing and drops down behind it. And you just think a car shouldn't end up there. How has it managed that?
Yeah,
but it was just spectacular about having him pinned in there. I mean, we had a few people saying, "Oh, the halo stopped him getting out." It's like, yes, but the halo did mean that there was a him to get out of it. I think if there wasn't a halo, regardless of how easy it was to get out or not, he would have not walked out of it. It would have done, because the roll hoop disintegrated and disappeared, because the roll hoop is there to withstand a certain weight and a certain force, but the car's weighing, well, full of fuel as it's the race start, weighing 800 kilos. It's not designed to be ground into the tarmac with 800 kilos of weight on it at 140 miles an hour. It's just not. So without doubt, the Halo saved its life.
So many of those big accidents in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, where the car turned over, you could see why some of the drivers preferred to be thrown out and take their chances, because staying in an upside-down car, the roll hoops were just never going to sustain a long period at any speed on tarmac or gravel, and drivers died of massive head injuries, those that had heads at the end of the accident. The introduction of the Halo, yes, it's been contested in its earliest days, but it saved so many lives.
Not just in Formula One, of course. This weekend again, I think there's 2 drivers walking around now who wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Halo in Formula 2.
Formula 2, indeed.
The shunt between Hauger and Nissany. Nissany had run Hauger wide, and he bounced along the grass but took off over the sausage curb. I mean, sausage curbs are another argument. We really do need to be removing those from all racetracks, like this week now. Like, just go and unbolt them, take them up, rip them out, dig them out, and do whatever you need to do. There's no place for those on any racetrack anywhere in the world, as far as I'm concerned. But Hauger had taken off over this sausage curb, and his car landed fully on the Halo, and it's the Halo that stopped Roy Nissany having his head ripped off. So it's all those that had derided it, as you say, on looks or aesthetics or whatever else. I mean, for a contrasting image, Vettel in the '92 Williams and having his shoulders out and whatever else, Vettel likened it to flying along, because you just feel that free. And actually, if you wanted to just put your arms out to the side as you were driving along, you could do, but I kind of think that's okay on its own. If there'd have been 2 of those in the F2 race, then it would have been a very different story. But when we were at Goodwood, we were having a look around the Formula W car, and we were struck, weren't we, Mike? First of all, on how small and teeny tiny it is, and wondering if either of us would fit in it, and we decided probably not. Or we'd get in, but maybe not be able to get out. But just the solid lump that is the Halo. I mean, it's unsurprising given what it's made out of and what it has to survive. But just, I sort of gave it a grab and a shake and a wiggle, and it's just, you can just feel the density and the strength in this thing. It must be.
It's a roll cage. It's a roll cage, isn't it?
Quite comforting, but yeah, it's
more than a roll cage. I mean, it's rated to 6,000 kilos, and this is why the production of them is not by the teams. The teams are obliged to buy them from a specific manufacturer so that they are uniform and nobody's tempted to shave them a little, make them a little more aerodynamic, whatever. 6,000 kilos, as they keep saying, is about the weight of 2 elephants, but there you go. I don't know what elephants are doing in Formula One cars, but They have saved a number of lives since their introduction just a few years ago. So good on them, and it's a major safety feature. The thing that I think was most bizarre about that incident was, I can't remember, Jim, your knowledge might be more up to date than mine on this, but I can't remember a car being flipped over the Tech Pro in quite that way. Because the gap between the Tech Pro and the catch fencing is quite narrow, and it made the marshals did a fabulous job, and the doctor to get in there and work on Joe while he was still effectively upside down. I mean, he was trapped at a very odd angle, and clearly, they won't attempt to get the driver out of the car until the doctor gives them the say-so that it's safe to do so.
I can't remember in Formula One, in any recent memory, a car ending up like that, just sort of flipping and bouncing over
between the two.
That. I mean, as I said, Sophia Flörsch, and I think there was a crash in, I think it was F3 Monza a few years back, and a guy had run wide and bounced over again a sausage curb on the exit of a 100 and something mile an hour corner, and he took off spectacularly and almost cleared the catch fencing as well, and ended up in the forest the other side. Again, why we still had sausage curbs after that weekend, I'm not sure. But yeah, it's certainly a rarity. But we normally associate that kind of thing. But I think even Mark Webber's Valencia accident with Kovalainen a few years back, he landed and was on the tarmac enough before he hit the Tech Pro, and that just absorbed him and gently bounces you back out again. It's it's unusual, but always with these things, it needs to be thank God for Halo. Hasn't everyone done well? Yes, you've got to be careful not to pat yourself on the back too much. You need to take everything away from it that you can and say, well, what could have made that worse? Let's avoid that. What could have made that better? Let's do some of that.
I would concur with you about the dangers of some of the curbs, though, and anything that has the potential to launch a car in that way really it has no place on a track that's supposedly licensed to Formula One standards.
I don't think it's so much the circuit's fault, is it? They are allowed and they're within the rules, and I think a lot of the times these sausage curbs get put in by the governing body of that particular race weekend as a result of what they want to do. They want to manage track limits at a particular turn, so they put in sausage curbs or sawtooth curbs, or they'll move things or do things, or they put whatever measures they want in place. MotoGP rock up and they'd say, take that out, take that out, take that out, take that out, or we're not racing, that's it, get on with it. So but I think it goes the other way with track limits. Okay, track limits are track limits, but put a tiny strip of gravel or a strip of grass or a strip of very slick, very low grip surface there to penalise drivers running wide with a lack of grip, not with the potential to aeroplane themselves up into on top of another car, into the catch fencing, into the crowd, whatever. It's not worth thinking about.
I think we also need to mention that the Halo has saved a lot of drivers who have stayed the right way up but have had something impact the cockpit area or actually land in the cockpit area. Thinking immediately of obviously Senna in '94. Henry Surtees, very much so. Rubens Barrichello, with
Joe Bianchi.
With bits of car ending up in the cockpit with them, and it seems to have solved that problem. Thank God for that.
I think in terms of Formula One safety, it's been a few different factors as a result of a few different accidents, and just as a halo won't protect you in certain accidents, and you need Nomex in other accidents, and you need a HANS device in other accidents, there's been several strides in Formula One. But I think road cars, what's the single biggest safety goal? I saw something the other day that reminded me about Ford having inflatable rear seat belts, and I remember them making a big deal about them when they came out, and they were
airbag
an option that cost they cost a couple of quid, but they all of a sudden just seemed to go away and they weren't a big deal anymore, and then I don't think they offer them on anything now. Whereas flip that round with road safety, the obvious answer to that would be the seatbelt, and Volvo did it the other way. Not only did they not charge for it, they also didn't patent it so that everybody else could have it and benefit from it. So, I think for me, seatbelts is one of those things, and guy Volvo, and Volvo and George Russell should link up at some point and be good guys together. But it's I think that's probably the one biggest safety thing, I think, for the most number of lives, I would say.
I quite agree. There's a number of other things that Volvo have introduced, but there was a famous GM executive in the 50s, I think it was, no, early 60s, when we had the Ralph Nader things going on with the conveyors that would sort of blow up if they were crashed into from the rear. But he famously in a Senate hearing said, well, safety will never sell cars. How misguided and blind that man clearly was.
This is one of those interesting things. This is, who you think Volvo were the first or pioneers in introducing a lot of tech into cars, or introducing it as standard. And we've got seatbelts as an example. The one thing that I've been thinking about adding to the Onion recently is a third brake light. And this is something that appeared through, what was it really, the late 90s. They started to appear, and they became mandatory, and sometimes they're irritating, they affect the design of the car or whatever. But the truth of the matter is, the amount of times I've been stopped in traffic and people haven't noticed because I haven't got a third light on at the back, And when cars in front of you, when that bulb's gone or the LED strip's not working, you really notice it when you're coming up behind them and the light's not on. And you think, oh, bugger, I'm just about to hit them up the back. And carrying passengers more now than I ever used to, I think I probably should chuck that in there. And you think it's odd things that we take for granted that aren't necessarily a safety device, and that it protects you inside the car like a seatbelt or like an airbag or thorax bag or whatever it's going to be that we have. But these little things that you sort of don't really notice come in. Day running lights. Again, you sort of think Volvo and Sweden and everything else. Volvo's had lights on at the front for years. I tend to find when you're driving down and people pull in at the side of the road to let people through, if they haven't got day running lights on now, people don't notice that the car's on.
Yeah, they think you're parked.
Yes, and people will then make a move or pull out. And I've noticed this when I've been driving the older stuff, or the Mini, for example. People seem to think you stopped, so they just go to move around you. Hang on a second. I think it's because people have got so used to seeing day running lights on pretty much everything, I think, since 2013. Correct me if I'm wrong. Someone will tell me, I'm sure. All these little things that have come in over time, which you've gone, why do you really need that? And I imagine people have done this with everything. I know people were anti-seatbelt, which to me seems absolutely crackers. It seems potty.
It seems so odd, doesn't it?
It does, but then I've always had it. And the first thing I do when I sit in the car is put the seatbelt on. I don't even think about it.
When the seatbelt laws came in, there was a raft of people who claimed a medical exemption from wearing a seatbelt for whatever stupid, unbeknownst reason, wasn't there? And it's like the history does seem to have a pattern of repeating itself on that, doesn't it? People think, oh, it's a safety thing. No, I don't like that. A bit like the drink driving videos. Oh, no, that's nonsense. That's for other people. That's not for me. Oh, no, they'll never catch on. No, silly. Don't need that. But but I think certain things like tyres, grippy tyres. If you drove a car from the 1950s or 1960s, you'd be staggered or hilariously or otherwise by the lack of grip. But actually, if you bolted a modern set of alloys with some Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 Fandango grippy super duper tyres, it would absolutely transform the car. So just having more grip at each corner, allowing you to brake, steer, manoeuvre better. How many accidents has that avoided? Because I think ultimately you can have all the airbags, crumple zones, testicle seatbelts, whatever you want in a car, but actually don't hit anything in the first place is probably a good idea. Then you never need to test any of these safety systems. So good brakes and good tyres and good steering always help.
Improving the cockpit of the average family car. I can remember driving cars. Yes, I'm a lot older than the rest of you, but I can remember driving cars through the 60s and 70s that had horrible switches that would stick in you, and I will never forget seeing somebody with the radio knob embedded in the front of the skull. The cars of the 50s and 60s were full of sharp projections. They're not anymore. It's all deformable, it's all soft and squidgy. And those injuries that occurred in the cars are much fewer than they used to be.
Well, I still think the one of the most graphic representations of a car injuring somebody I've ever seen was when I'd gone to the breaker's yard to get some bits out of a car after a smash. And we'd walked away and it was absolutely fine. So, just the odd little bruise here or there. But there was an Opel Manta that had an MDF parcel shelf with 6x9s on it, and in my car I had a big heavy MDF parcel shelf with a set of 6x9s on it. But this particular Manta had gone off the side of a hill or a cliff or a something or other, and there were just 2 bloodstains along the parcel shelf where it had gone nose into the ground, and the car that was doing 40, 50 miles an hour suddenly stopped and the parcel shelf didn't. And of course, what's the parcel shelf height is, it's your head, isn't it? So it had decapitated the driver and the passenger. And I sort of looked at this thing and my dad said to me, it was do you see now why I said you need to bolt that in properly? And I'd fitted, bolts to the side of the parcel shelf to lock it in using the mounting points, and a little bolt round the back of the seat mounting anchor points to secure it in and make sure it didn't go anywhere. It was like, oh yeah, that's a really good point actually. And it was unsecured loads are never a good thing. But yeah, thankfully we don't see too much of that these days.
I will never forget going to collect my daughter on her release from hospital after discovering that she got a fractured skull because a friend's car, which didn't have rear seat headrests, they hit something and the camping weekend tent et al. Snapped her head to the point where it fractured her skull.
Wow.
Ouch.
I remember seeing someone have to brake really, really hard, emergency stop on a motorway, and they had a little dog in the back, and the dog flew forward and ended up wrapped around the back of the lady's neck, and she got out in quite a lot of pain. The dog was winded, I think, rather than anything else. But yeah, that must have hurt. And you sort of think, I kind of understood from that point why you're supposed to put the dog in a cage or belt them in rather than letting them run around and sit in your lap and sit on the parcel shelf and everything else.
My friend from Scotland, when I went to go and pick his Fiesta up those couple of weeks back, was showing me the harness he has for his Alsatian. I mean, the Alsatian is bigger
heavy
than a lot of small humans. He's bigger than at least one of my children. But the harness and the arrangement he had to strap him in, I'd feel quite safe being strapped into the back of that thing and having a reasonable size shunt. But it's a good point. You don't let kids roam around in the car without a seatbelt and jump around everywhere. So
absolutely not
for your animals.
In other news, I would like to say hello to the Mini Moke owners who listened to our podcast describing how some of us would probably only want to use those in warmer climes and invited us along to go and see what it's like to drive it.
Well, yes, they slightly called us out. It did sound a bit like them's fighting words, didn't it? There was definitely a bit of a not quite a gauntlet, a driving glove slapped round the face, wasn't it? It was like, come on then, have a go.
Yes, the gauntlet has been thrown down. So I wanted to say hi in particular to Andy, who's invited me into the fold and said that I should come along and experience one for myself and maybe take one for a drive. I mean, we did move on at one point to talking about Moke clothes, which presumably mean waterproof and warm, but he insists that if it is raining, regardless of how much it's raining, assuming you're going fast enough, you don't get wet if you've got the roof on because the water doesn't come in the sides. So we will find out. Will find out in due course. But an absolutely lovely chap who wrote us a very impassioned message to say no, you're wrong. So I look forward to being proved wrong as resident mini nut. I look forward to meeting him soon. It was almost a step outside if you want to drive one sort of thing.
Yes.
But in a nice, friendly way, wasn't it? Do you want to step outside and drive one? Why you step out? Well, you can't drive them indoors. Well, okay, good point. Yeah, let's go. Well, it was a nice day. Let's go. It was a friendly challenge, wasn't it? It's a good amount of cheeky banter and the type that we know and love from being in the cars. And I will say, actually, as a point, I've been to many car shows and such over my life, and I'm quite enjoying taking my lad along. He's starting to appreciate them more and more now than he ever has, really. And we go around and he sees I want to see the minis, for example. If we were at this weekend, lots of Aston Martins, a DB5, a DB6, and really exciting stuff. This was at the Sad Case annual show in Storrington, which I recommend looking up if you're somewhere around about the mid Sussex area or in Sussex generally. Look up Sad Case. It's well worth a look. Storrington and District Car and Sports Car Enthusiasts. I wonder if they came up with the name first or the acronym. Anyway, really great show and a really great bunch of people who are obviously as tongue in cheek as we are. And he just wanted to find the minis, Austin, and we had a good old look round. But for me, when you sort of start to go on the various different rallies and tours and you show the cars and stuff, it actually ends up becoming more about the people. I mean, they say describe your job badly, and you might have seen this. So a photographer, for example, would say, "I go to weddings and shoot people" or something. It's just it sounds terrible, doesn't it? It's the worst thing you could possibly think of, but they're a photographer. And Amy said, "So what do you do for these kind of things?" Well, I stand in a field, yes, mostly with other guys that drive the same car as I do and talk about them. And it sounds very bizarre when you say it like this, but the truth of the matter is, I've met so many wonderful guys and girls that have been into these machines and proud to show them off and talk about them and have these sort of tongue-in-cheek conversations, such as we've said about Andy, who loves his Moke and is keen for us to try and to share these experiences with people, because that's part of the whole thing. I think we met a lady who got a 1927 Austin. It was a 7-seater. This thing, it was huge, coach-built body on the back, and the seats. If you think about the depth of a normal car seat at the back, were twice as deep. They're absolutely huge. so comfy. But when we went up and my lad was, I said, this Austin, this is an Austin. So come in and have a. I said, that looks comfy. Come in. Do you want to come in and try it? Do you want to come in, and play with the steering wheel? Do you want to, whatever? And it's part of being able to enjoy these cars and share them. I think is really exciting. Cars are something that we are passionate about, but what are they if they're just a box of metal that you can sit and look at? Some of them, yes, I guess are kind of art. But it's about the shared experiences and be able to share this with people. I said earlier that I've never bought a car for other people, and that is absolutely true. But I've definitely enjoyed the people that I've met and experiences that I've had when I've bought things. I was looking back quite fondly at some pictures of old XR3 convertible I had when I was at uni the first time round, and some friends of mine posted up saying this was excellent. We used to go on road trips places throughout. Sometimes in the middle of winter when it was freezing cold with the roof off, just to random places for no real reason, with some music on. There's a video. One of my mates is just saying to me, "Oh, is this car okay?" I was like, "It's sort of okay. Are the brakes any good?" No, not really. And it's all these kind of these shared experiences that you have that I think makes car culture and talking about cars and speaking with you guys, and thank you so much everyone for listening. We care about this more than you know, that make it all worthwhile, make it interesting, and that something that we know and love and enjoy. And I guess probably on that note, it's time to say goodnight to you, or good day, or good morning, or whenever you're listening to us. Anyway, from me, now it's good night.
From me, Jim, it's goodbye, and just thank you for that motivational speech. I feel thoroughly inspired and thoroughly proud, and just very very patriotic for some reason. I'm not quite sure why.
UK Motor Talk.
I think that should be the mantra for any car club up and down the country. I really think you hit the nail on the head there, Michael.
So it's not the cars, it's the people you enjoy in them. No.
Exactly so. Good night, folks. Thanks for listening.
Good night, all. Take care.
Good night.
UK Motor Talk, a First Take Media production.